I'm Taylor Malmsheimer. I've been at Section since it was founded, so part of the founding team, and lead our advisory and product teams at Section. Advisory is most relevant today because through that work, my team and I spend every day working with AI executives to overcome their barriers to getting value from AI. So we're working with many companies that have found significant ROI and talking with many that haven't yet. And across these hundreds of organizations, we see probably 10 to 15 distinct barriers that I would say limit a company from getting ROI from AI. So today, I'm going to unpack some of those. I want to make a quick last housekeeping note before I jump in. I shared 4 of these barriers throughout the day at our AI ROI conference a few weeks ago. So if you were there for the full day and you saw the 4 10-minute sessions that I did, you are going to see some similar content. I'm also going to share 6 additional barriers, but I won't be offended if you hop off, check the recording. I know there's a small portion of people who there is similar overlap with. So with that, I'm going to jump in, get started. Before we get to the barriers, I want to just set a little bit of context. So I'm going to start with what I think about as maybe the dirty secret or the open secret of AI today, which is every CEO, right, is writing press releases that they've rolled out AI, and companies are buying AI platforms. That has started to increase and really accelerate. But at the same time, adoption is not keeping up with the pace of investment, and frankly, it's stalling out in a lot of organizations. And I would say this chart is a good metaphor for the average company that we go into, right? They've increased their investment in AI platforms. They saw a slight uptick in usage from the 10% of the org that's an early adopter. And then after that, things have kind of stalled out. And this is a huge problem because from our perspective, the first step to getting ROI from AI is your employees have to actually use it. So our point of view is that the baseline, the kind of initial, hurdle to tackle or get over is 80% of your workforce needs to be using AI to its fullest capabilities each week. So that's what I think of as when I'm asking, our partners and our clients, what does your adoption look like? I'm really looking at 2 things. I'm looking at weekly active usage as a minimum. Are people using the AI platforms that you've rolled out weekly? Because that's a point at which they're actually starting to use AI consistently and embed it in their work and become more AI first. And then we're also looking at sophistication of use. So these platforms are really, really powerful. But if your employees are only using them to summarize emails, even if they're doing it frequently, they're not using the platforms to their fullest capabilities, and you're not going to capture ROI from these platforms. So this is one way to kind of think about it. If you roll out an LLM or an AI platform, you have 2 levers to pull to capture value. You have frequency of use, and then you have the productivity gain. How productive are they from this usage of AI? Obviously, more people using AI and more people using AI productively means more realized savings because you're able to accomplish more at the same cost, or you're able to accomplish, the same at less cost, right? And so that's how we kind of frame up the ROI calculation for our clients, especially if they've rolled out a kind of horizontal AI platform or a vertical platform inside of a specific part of the organization, like marketing or sales or product or things like that. Now, sometimes I get a question or pushback around, can I get ROI from AI without widespread adoption? Can I skip straight to the top part of this pyramid, which is where a lot of people and a lot of executives want to go, right? They want to jump right to business process automation, rolling out agents. Why deal with kind of the massive change management problem that comes with work, getting everyone or getting 80% of your workforce using AI effectively? And my answer here, I would say, is maybe that is possible. It's not what we're seeing today. In all the companies that we work with, talk to the companies we've studied that are getting AI ROI, they did start at the bottom of this pyramid. They start with this workforce augmentation, getting 80% of the workforce using AI to its fullest capabilities. And there's 2 reasons for this. One is just it's faster. It takes a lot of time to get to the top of this pyramid. To build true business process automation or even kind of individual workflow automation, you have to get your data in order. You have to get all your security and permissions in order. You have to pilot and test and ensure you're comfortable with the accuracy level. You have to train employees, and that in itself is a change management process, right? And frankly, the top two parts of this pyramid are not happening in 80% of organizations yet today. And in the 20% or 10% where it is happening, it's taken those organizations 2 to 3 years. But these tools are incredibly, incredibly powerful off the shelf. So you can get ROI from them if you get them into the hands of your people faster than that and start to get this first layer of the pyramid, this workforce augmentation. The second reason I think the bottom of the pyramid is so important is that AI thrives on subject matter expertise. And I'm going to talk about this a lot today, but your employees are subject matter experts on how your business works. So they are your SMEs on what good looks like, where the friction is in your business. And so having those employees, those subject matter experts using AI, understanding where AI can be valuable and its capabilities, then means that you can faster have those employees identify for you the best, most valuable, highest ROI opportunities for the top part of this pyramid. So again, at Section, we see the workforce augmentation piece as really the first step to ROI, getting 80% of employees actually using AI effectively. Now, this is a tall task. I'm going to focus today mostly on that bottom part of the pyramid. And that, there's a whole journey here to get to kind of that workforce augmentation piece on the bottom part of that pyramid, right? So you have to take employees from, I don't know why they want us to use AI, all the way to AI being their competitive advantage and your organization's competitive advantage. And there's a lot of steps along the way, and there are barriers that exist along the way of this kind of continuum. Most organizations approach that journey as a standard software deployment problem. And they run a standard software rollout or change management playbook. So it's usually something on the right. This is quite common, I would say, in organizations that we kind of when we first enter the organization, right? The CEO has published a memo. They've said we're AI first. They've mandated AI for employees. They rolled out a platform and they scheduled, an offsite or an AI week where there are presentations and trainings and, a lot of focus and emphasis put on AI. Maybe they appoint a few ambassadors or champions, but then it's back to business as usual. And they kind of wait, right, for adoption and usage and then ROI to follow. And so if your organization's doing this, I don't want you to panic, but I do want you to realize that it's probably not going to work. It's not going to drive that 80% of employees using AI to its fullest capabilities each week because AI isn't like typical software. And if you think about a traditional software rollout, there are a few conditions that just aren't the case for this rollout, for the rollout of AI. There are probably more than this. These are the three that I think are the most important or that we see as the most influential right now. The first is software. We're all trained to assume software behaves a certain way. Most software, you give it the same inputs, it always gives you the same output. Most of you who have used AI know that's literally the opposite of how AI works. You give it the same inputs and it gives you a different output every time. Similar, but different. So it behaves very different than any other software. Therefore, it comes with a bunch of different considerations. It's different for your employees to experience. The implications of how they use it, where they use it, what good looks like are all different. And therefore, that rollout has to be approached differently. Second, when you deploy new software, there's usually a changeover date when the old software isn't available. So employees can't default to the old way anymore, right? They're forced to move to the new way. That doesn't happen with AI. The old way of doing, the non-AI way of doing something usually still exists in your organization. The option is still available. So that forcing function that drives a lot of that transition and drives that tipping point to a new software or new transformation, it doesn't exist. Frankly, the old software is often our brains, right? It's us doing something, which brings me to the third one, which is usually your employees don't have an emotional attachment to their old project management software or their old ERP. Maybe a couple of them do, but most of them don't. So whatever software is being replaced doesn't have that emotional attachment. With AI, a lot of your employees have an emotional attachment to the old way they did things, to using, their own creativity or, to the fact that a lot of their work is something that might be able to be automated with AI. So these are just three examples, right? But running that typical playbook is just not going to work when you have such a different technology that's being rolled out that's kind of unlike any other technology that we've rolled out before. And frankly, we all know rolling technology out previously was already hard. So this is kind of in addition to all of those same considerations with getting people to change. So back to our kind of journey, we have to apply a new playbook, right? And the organizations that we see that are getting ROI, they are actually approaching this in new ways, and they're knocking down these barriers at every step of the journey. So I'm going to start today by focusing on the 4 most common barriers we see. They happen earliest in this journey, and I'm going to focus on them because they are not the most exciting necessarily. They're not the sexiest, but they are the most common. If you don't overcome these barriers, you frankly don't get to the other ones. And they're what we see happening in most organizations right now at this kind of tipping point where they've purchased the software, they've decided, okay, we're going to have our employees use AI, and then they've actually, started to try to see adoption, and they're not seeing that adoption. And then I'll wrap up and share about 6 more common barriers that we see. So let's dig in. We're going to jump right in. Number 1, the first barrier that we usually see, your company or your organization lacks a why of AI. So this is a pretty typical company that we work with at the beginning of an engagement. So when we go into an organization, we survey their employees, we do a diagnostic, we understand their proficiency, their current AI use, their attitudes towards AI. And this is typical of what we would usually see in an organization that we start with. About 3/4 of employees say that there's not a formal AI strategy. This specific data is actually from a company that had already rolled out 3 or 4 LLMs, I believe, and has a pretty technology savvy knowledge workforce population. So it's not like it's a super old school company either, right? And even in this company, only 23% of employees say that the company has a formal strategy. Really, really common. Often the business leaders feel like, of course, there's a strategy that's driving workforce AI use, but the employees say they have no idea. So why is this a problem? When we dig deeper to understand this roadmap, we start to hear comments like this. All of you may have heard comments like this. I've heard comments like this previously, right? We shouldn't be using AI just for the sake of using it. And I think it's fair in some organizations, especially today, maybe 2 years ago or so, this was more common or people had more patience with this. But now, right, it's kind of like as a leader, we're kind of past this point, right? Like we believe we buy into the fact that winning companies will leverage AI. We have to maintain a competitive edge. Our board and our investors and our CEO is saying, why aren't we AI powered yesterday? And so companies jump past this part and they jump right into rolling out the tool and telling everyone they need to be using AI. But your employees need this. They need that why of AI. They have to understand and frankly feel bought into why you're expecting them to use AI. It's one of the most consistent things that we see in companies where the executives are reporting real ROI, is that they've spent the time to articulate the organization's why of AI. And that's because, again, getting the employees to actually jump over these types of hurdles is hard. We just talked about some of this, right? You'll have 10% of your workforce as the early adopters. They'll figure it out on their own. You'll have another big swath of your employees that are using AI personally. But to get them to use it at work, you have an uphill battle. It's hard to get people to change. People are emotional about AI's impact on their creativity and their job security and what it means for them. And if they don't hear this why of AI, they'll fill in kind of their own blanks as to why you're using AI. And that's where you end up with comments like this, right? We shouldn't be using AI just for the sake of using it. So you have to reframe AI as the means, not the ends. The best companies that we work with that have very wide scale, consistent, heavy adoption, their why of AI is grounded in this idea that using AI is imperative to the business. It's imperative to the survival of the business in legacy organizations, potentially. It can mean it's imperative to beating your competitors. It can mean it's imperative to serving your customers. It can mean it's a combination of all those things. But companies with significant workforce adoption and real meaningful use cases have convinced their employees that AI is imperative to the core mission of the business, the reason the employees join the company in the first place. And so at Section, we call this an AI manifesto, a living, breathing document that is always updated, never out of date, that conveys your organization's why of AI, that imperative or mission critical reason that you need AI to do what your business was created to do. And it's something that's referenced over and over again, right? It makes clear AI isn't a nice to have. It isn't something we believe we should do. It's something that's mission critical to surviving and winning as a business. And it's grounded in what the business was created to do. It's the means, right? It's not the ends. It can't be this. It can't be we want to be more efficient. We want to be more productive. That might be the CFO's why of AI, to be fair. It might be even one of your company's whys of AI, but it's not the one that you can rally employees around to drive usage and experimentation with the technology. It just blatantly introduces too many questions, right, around job security and well, what does it mean if I'm supposed to be more productive? And so the why of AI again has to be tied to what the organization was built and exists to do. So there are some good examples. This is one of my favorites, Duolingo. Duolingo got some pushback. Basically, every company that's published a memo publicly has gotten some pushback. But when I look at this, I think this is a pretty strong, explicit why of AI, right? Their mission is to teach their customers. They have to develop massive amounts of content to teach their customers. And that's always been really hard. And I would bet that employees inside of Duolingo are used to hearing and know of experience that this is a friction point in their business. And therefore, to fulfill on that business imperative, which is to create content that teaches millions of customers, they have to use AI. They should use AI, right? It's clear like the why of AI is tied to what the business has set out to do and what the business's value proposition is to their customers. So these are a couple other examples as well that I've seen. I've anonymized some just because they're not public, but they all tie back right to the company's reason for being and how they better serve their customers across healthcare, across client services, across retail, and on across those industries. The last thing I would say here is I don't want to imply that this is easy or fast, right? It requires aligning your executives on one clear, simple why, which is, as many of us know, work with executives, not always the simplest, easiest thing to do. It also requires getting the next level and the next level down of managers, so your frontline managers, equipped with the same message, right? And hammering home that message over and over again. Because one of the things that we see that I'll talk about later is if it's just coming from the top, but it's not coming from the middle, that's another kind of clear barrier. But again, I just want to reiterate in the companies we've seen where they have 70, 80, 90% weekly adoption to the fullest capabilities of the LLM, where they are reporting in $1 million use cases, they've all done this. They've all established that why of AI. The second barrier that we see time and time again is a lack of access. This one does not sound super sexy. And when I talk to most executives, they're like, yeah, we've got that. We've rolled AI out. We've hurdled this barrier. But often when we dig in, that's not actually what we see when we get into the organization. So it sounds obvious, right? You can't get ROI from your investments if you haven't given the right employees in the organization access to those investments. And most companies have said they've done this. So this is relatively recent data from earlier this year. 80% of executives reported that they've piloted or deployed an enterprise LLM. But we do a lot of benchmarking. We go into organizations and benchmark and survey those organizations. We also do a bunch of benchmarking and measuring across kind of the wider knowledge workforce. And one of the things we ask knowledge workers about is their access to AI. And then we look at among employees that work for companies that approve of AI. So when the employee says, okay, I work for a company that approves of AI, they want me using AI. Only 29% of those employees say that an LLM has been made available to them. So again, like think about that. This is among employees who they feel like the company approves of AI. So it excludes anyone who said their company discourages AI or even is silent on AI. Less than a third of those employees say they have access to a company-sponsored LLM. That is a real lack of access, right? And so what is going on in there? Why do we have this kind of disparity between what companies feel like they've done and what employees are experiencing? So these are quotes from employees at companies we've spoken to in the last few months. And the reality here, I think, is that rollouts have just been messy, right? So often a few people were granted access to a Teams account and then more people heard about it. And then they ask for access and then it snowballs. And then suddenly no one's exactly sure who has access to what tool. Sometimes the platform gets rolled out to a small team. We've seen this. IT or someone else gets spooked and they pull it back. Often it's opt-in versus opt-out, so you have to ask, right, to get access to these platforms, which slows down access. Sometimes employees just don't know that it's available. This is a common one that we see as well. Now, I know there's cost implications, there's security implications. Again, a lot of these barriers, I'm not saying it's easy to overcome them, but I'm saying that if you want to get to that truly AI powered workflow force that's finding those real high value use cases, you need nearly every knowledge worker using AI weekly. They can't do that, right, if they don't have access. There's kind of two, I would summarize all the lack of access that we see into two scenarios. The first is the company rolled AI out to everyone, but it's this hamstrung version of AI. So it doesn't include access to the best models or the best capabilities. Usually what's happened is as they went through kind of IT and procurement, it got kind of whittled down so that the capabilities that are the most powerful are excluded from what's been rolled out to the organization. One of the most common examples of this I see is that the organization has rolled out ChatGPT for enterprise and the employees haven't been given access to custom GPTs, for example. And when I tell execs that we talk to that have found significant ROI from AI, they're kind of shocked by that by the idea that you would give employees access to GPT without something like custom GPTs, because they're getting so much value out of these kind of more advanced capabilities where their employees are empowered to actually build their own semi-automated workflows using something like custom GPTs. So this is a very, very common. AI has been rolled out, but it's this hamstrung version of AI. The second scenario is it was rolled out to a pocket of the organization. And I think this is fine if it's short and fast. A pilot makes sense. Getting a champions group on board with AI and understanding its capabilities makes sense. But if you let this kind of linger, and this is like the whole strategy, this is where you start to see limited ROI. So this is an issue for a couple reasons. In the first scenario, when you roll out a hamstrung version of AI, two things happen. Your beginners assume AI doesn't work well. You have confirmation bias where a lot of employees right now don't want to believe that AI is as powerful as someone might tell them. They go into the platform and they experience that. They don't see, the best models. They see old versions of GPT that are just not as good, to be honest. They don't see others using AI in sophisticated ways, and you convince your beginners, you validate anyone who was like, I don't think AI would be that useful to me. You validate that for them right off the bat. The second thing that happens is your advanced users get frustrated. And when they get frustrated, they use their own platforms. So in organizations where we come in and this is the case, we see really high rates of shadow AI because these advanced users on their personal account, they're getting the most advanced capabilities, right? And then they use the professional account and it's just not the same experience. And that's where you get some shadow AI. When you restrict access to one team or function or level, similar implications. Usually what happens here is your novices get anxious, right? They hear about AI use, but they're not experiencing it themselves. And then that creates more questions than answers, right? About what's going on over there, what quality of work is coming out about AI, what's happening in marketing where they're talking about using Copilot. And that can lead to more resistance. And then the second thing we see is similar to the first scenario, your advanced users are similarly frustrated, right? If they don't get access, and there's going to be some early adopters in every part of the organization, no matter how much you try to pick the pockets of the organization where AI use is highest or should be highest, and those employees usually go underground, that drives your shadow AI use up. So if you're gonna invest in an LLM and really roll out AI, half measures are not gonna work. So this is what I think about as your mandate as an AI leader is get every knowledge worker access and coaching to an enterprise LLM, turn on the most advanced capabilities, and then create a fast, efficient process that allows functional teams to pilot tools in addition to that horizontal AI you've laid out that cater to their specific team goals. Again, this can take 6 months, right? It takes some organizations a long time to achieve kind of what I would consider true access. At the same time, it is possible. We work with execs in highly regulated industries that have done this. Some of them have had to build new solutions, especially for the thing all the way on the right, right? They've had to bring IT and finance and HR and all these parts of the business along to, make it so that they can kind of work at the speed that AI that these tools are being developed at. But again, consistently across those advanced organizations, they have done these three things and they've achieved kind of that real access. All right, let's go to number three. Number three is maybe even less exciting and sexy on face value than access. It's around governance. But then after this, I promise it'll get more exciting. And I think these are exciting. I think most people think of their AI policy and governance strategy as solving a compliance problem. I think it actually should solve for you an adoption problem. So this is, again, a pretty typical company that we work with. We ask employees about their organization's AI governance policy and their data, their guidelines for how they should be using AI. And about 75% say they frankly have no clue. It is usually the most common answer. Another group of people usually say there isn't one, and then there's a small portion of the organization that knows that there is one. And this is in an organization that has rolled out something, maybe not the best possible thing, which I'll talk about in a second, but they do have technically, a one pager on the guidelines of how they should be using AI. This is a big problem for ROI because it impedes adoption. It also impedes experimentation, which I'll talk about in a second. So again, back to our benchmarking data, when we ask employees what limits their AI usage, this is one of the key questions we ask is why aren't you using AI more? The number one reason that employees select is concern about data privacy or security. Super important. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. Again, when we ask people what limits their AI use, the most common answer is this one. I'm worried about data security or privacy. It's more common than concerns about hallucinations. It's more common than concerns about job loss. It's more common than I don't know how to use AI or I don't know what to use it for. So no clear usage policy isn't just a compliance issue. It's actually an adoption and a usage issue as well. I think this is a huge challenge in organizations because right now AI is really like a sandbox. To find the most high value use cases, you need your employees, those subject matter experts, right, on how your business works. They have to be kind of playing with AI. This is one of the consistent things we see in more advanced orgs is they've created a really strong culture of experimentation. They talk about AI as like you're kind of playing with AI. And that's how you figure out what this software is good for. Again, unlike other software where the use case is kind of clear, AI is a Swiss Army knife, and you have to figure out what are the parts of the ways your organization does things that will ladder to what AI can be useful for. And so, this is again where if your employees don't feel empowered to actually go experiment and play and use AI, they're not actually going to do this experimentation. And one of the biggest limiting factors we see to employees doing that is they don't feel safe or protected to do so. They're worried about, am I allowed to use the platform? Am I allowed to use the platform in this way? Am I allowed to put this type of information into the platform? We all know AI works best with lots of context. So am I allowed to give it that level of context? And that's where you stop. You stop getting usage, you stop getting adoption, and you stop getting kind of that experimentation. So this is what we see in those type of organizations. Usually when I have a survey slide like this one that I showed at the beginning, usually then what we see in our analysis is that these organizations are having less experimentation, or at least much more siloed and silent experimentation with AI. Right? So people aren't talking about using AI. If they found what they think might be a good use case, they're kind of keeping it close to their chest. We also see a higher prevalence of beginner level use cases versus more advanced use cases. I'll talk about those in a moment. And worse, we just see kind of a culture of secrecy or fear versus, again, that culture of experimentation, which we see in organizations that are experiencing really strong kind of AI ROI. So this is, again, your mandate as an AI leader. You have to publish specific and simple guardrails. It has to be more than don't upload sensitive information. You have to be more specific than that. It has to be easy for employees to find these guardrails, right? It can't be just kind of buried in some small part of SharePoint. And especially, frankly, if you have an enterprise LLM, it has to explain any limits that you're enacting on that enterprise LLM or other improved platforms. I would say that the best organizations that we see, they don't just say don't do X. They say don't do X because Y and Z, right? They explain the intent of the guardrails, partly because these capabilities are changing fast, right? And you want employees to understand not just what they can't do, but what do they need to watch out for as they consider use cases and might discover use cases that your IT team just hasn't even thought of. So again, not easy. Um, I would say it is getting easier though. It's a lot easier than it was a year ago, even to have these types of clear, specific guardrails. Security and permission controls in LLMs have gotten a lot better. So I think that again, it's still not, it's still something that's going to take time, but really writing these type of guidelines through the lens of adoption, not just compliance, and therefore having a business leader in that conversation versus just an IT leader in that conversation is really, really important. Okay, our fourth barrier today is lack of use cases. Employees just don't know what they should be using AI for. So again, this data is pretty typical of a company that's had AI rolled out for 4 to 6 months. This specific data is from a financial services company with a relatively savvy knowledge worker population. They've had AI rolled out for about 5 months when we came in and did this analysis. And nearly half of the employees in this company don't have a specific AI use case. So 45%, nearly half, can't report one way that they use AI to significantly improve their work about 6 months into their rollout. So, from our point of view at Section, this is what your entire first year of rollout is about. You have to help employees find those hyper relevant AI use cases. It may not be what people, are want to jump into straight immediately. People want to again jump into some of that business process automation potentially, but like this is where you're going to get the fastest ROI, the fastest value, but it takes time. It takes months and months to actually surface those use cases to your employees. And I keep talking about your employees as the subject matter experts on how your business works, how your product works. If they don't have use cases for themselves personally in their work, then frankly, they're not spending enough time with AI to truly understand its capabilities and to identify those high ROI impacts. So usually it gets worse when we dig in. Of half the employees that do report having a use case, most are very, very beginner level. These are the top 5 use cases employees report when we ask for that use case that significantly improves their work. They're rewriting emails, they're doing quick fixes for code or for Excel formulas, or summarizing documents. Frankly, they're using AI as an alternative to Google is a very, very common one. And these are good quick time savings, but you're not going to get ROI from your investments if this is how your employees are using AI. It is where most people start, and that's where the adoption curve starts, but it's not, again, where you get true ROI as a business. Compare that to something like this. This is still an individual use case, but it's a more advanced use case. It's more of a workflow. So this is just one example of in that financial services company, when we talk to their employees, there are pockets of the org where people actually do have a strong use case. This is a good example, right? This employee took something that used to be done by, in their words, 4 market analysts doing a market deep dive, and they created a workflow that got them to 80 to 90% of that value in 24 hours. So it's not a custom app they developed. It's not, a team-wide AI workflow. It's still in the first level of that pyramid. But if it was scaled to hundreds of investors in this company, it would result in probably them ending the contract with one of their research partners that provides these analysts. That's real ROI. That's a real example of a use case. And that comes from the employees, the people who are doing the work, actually seeing these opportunities and kind of prototyping that use case first themselves, and then that scaling to the rest of the team. So after you get through, the strategy and the governance and actually getting people access, which again, a lot of people push past, but when we get into organizations, that is where we see a lot of friction. Then you have to get to this use case level. This is how I think about that use cases journey, moving every employee from having no individual use cases to having basic individual use cases, to then those more advanced use cases or workflows, and then taking those advanced use cases and rolling them out across the team in consistent team-wide workflows. This doesn't happen overnight. One of the biggest issues we see all the time is just lack of patience, right? The company already feels behind. They want to see the return on the investments yesterday, but it takes time for employees to kind of play in that sandbox and experiment and test a bunch of use cases that don't meaningfully help them, and then find the ones that will actually help the full team or company or organization. And so again, in most organizations that now have 80 to 100% of employees with strong use cases, it took about, I would say, 6 months minimum, and 12 months is kind of the average to get to that level of, really an AI first organization at that point. So your job as an AI leader is to shorten that adoption curve, right? You have to help employees find their own individual use cases. Without that, you don't get to these more systemic team-wide workflows. One way to do this is to start by finding your early champions and your early ambassadors. I think this is one people go to initially. It's a typical change management playbook strategy. It's great. It works. It doesn't work as the only thing, but it is a good way to kind of get employees using AI and then modeling and showcasing those use cases. But ultimately, you need really a change management program that helps every employee find a hyper-personalized use case at scale. In the organizations that we've seen, it's lunch and learns, and it's hackathons, and it's prompt contests. And frankly, right now, it's a lot of kind of manual hand-to-hand work to show as many employees as possible how they would use AI in the context of their role. We're not talking about the product side of the business, that section today, but I do lead that side. It's why we built Prof AI, which is our software solution, to really drive this type of change management at scale, show employees using AI the very hyper-personalized use cases they can find. And ultimately, as an AI leader, and I stole this line from Bryce Chalamel, who's the executive who leads AI adoption at Moderna. Your job as an AI leader is to create the conditions for your employees to tell you the transformative use cases for AI. No one can identify them all by themselves. No leader can do that. You have to rely on those subject matter experts. And part of creating the conditions to do that is getting your employees access to, or getting your employees knowing how they would use AI personally. Okay, what about the others? There's more than just the 4 barriers. So what I'm going to do is go a little bit faster and do kind of a lightning round of to round out the top 10 here. And then if we have time, we can answer a couple questions. So these are the 4 I just shared. Number 5, the organization has transformation fatigue. We are embedded with a large CPG company right now. They went through a digital transformation in the last 3 years, pre-AI. They implemented a new software. This is probably sounding very familiar to many of you. They didn't do a ton of change management with it. And when we went in and talked to employees, many of them referenced this previous transformation that had, quote, just happened in their minds. Leadership had framed it as a success. And frankly, the employees didn't feel like the transformation had happened. So when they started to roll AI out, this was the kind of thing that everyone indexed to, and the employees were resistant. So this is a good example of one that's like just dependent on your organization's work culture. And I highlight this one not because it's what we see everywhere, but because it's a good example of something you might not have thought about or think is going to hamper your AI adoption and rollout. But the reality is your employees are indexed to recent transformations you've done before. Number 6 is you're not talking about AI and its failures enough. So CEOs talk about AI a lot in theory. You have to talk about it in practice, real practical examples of what worked and what didn't. It's why, things that, again, don't sound that exciting, but shout outs to AI, employee use cases that are shared in the all hands, Slack channels where people share their examples. Those types of programs matter, and they particularly matter when you create an experience or a culture where employees can share things that didn't work. This is the reality of AI right now. It is, again, unlike a lot of software platforms we roll out that have been tested many, many, many times and should work, well most of the time, AI doesn't work for all the use cases you try it for, right? Some days it's really good at something and some days it's not really good at something. And this is the reality employees are going to experience. And you have to kind of tinker and experiment and try stuff and fail. And if you don't talk about that, if your leaders aren't talking about it, if you're not creating an environment where your employees are talking about it, then when users inevitably experience failure, and they will, right? They get discouraged, they get confused, they stop using it, they stop trying to figure it out, they stop taking a use case that didn't work 6 months ago and trying it again. And suddenly it does work. Like that is the experience that those of us that are using AI all the time, we know that, right? That like something we thought might work 6 months ago now works a little bit better or now works great and didn't. And so you have to kind of be talking about the ways that AI didn't work, your anti shout outs to AI, so to speak. Number seven, this is a huge one. You haven't empowered the right middle managers in your organization. So every organization has a level that I think of as like the linchpin or the leverage point in the org. And when we embed with companies, it's a key thing we're trying to figure out. What is that kind of linchpin level role in the org that basically turns strategy into execution in the organization? So sometimes it's like 200 VPs in a tech company we work with. Sometimes it's the 200 leaders of all the individual agencies in a big agency conglomerate. You probably know what it is for your organization where you work. Again, it's that level of the org where you really see kind of a lot of leverage in turning strategy into execution. And these are the managers that have to build their own functional plans for AI adoption. This is where you find those high value use cases, and therefore that's where ROI happens, right? In that financial services company example with that investor team, you need the leader of that team to be saying to employees, I need you using AI every day to figure out the different parts of our business that we can make faster, cheaper, higher quality. And so these functional leaders, whatever that level is in your org, you have to get them on board and you have to be kind of really holding them accountable to driving their own AI pilots inside their parts of the org where you can unlock those opportunities to cut or create. Everyone thinks about the execs and everyone talks about the bottom and everyone forgets the middle there. Number eight, this is super, super common. You started with tools, not workflows. I can like the number of times that we hear executives say they want to build agents or they want to use Harvey on the legal team, right? You have a tool in mind. You've picked a tool and you want the tool to be implemented, but you haven't figured out what for. This is where you get, that stat that everyone quotes, 80% of AI pilots aren't going into production. That's why. They're starting with the tool, not the workflow. You have to start with the workflows and vet those workflows for business value. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of time and money building a solution that doesn't either work or doesn't kind of move the needle for the business. So I was talking to a CEO recently, and he was convinced that he wanted to automate the RFP process in his organization. And the company was in knowledge services, so like made sense in theory, right? Like when I heard it, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So then we dig in and we talk to the team that's actually doing RFP responses today. And it's actually a pretty small team. It's two people. It's really primarily one guy who spends about a third of his time doing RFP responses. Let's say he made $125,000. I would bet that's roughly accurate. So that's about a $40,000 a year use case to automate that process, right? He can do more RFPs, or he can take that time elsewhere, or they can decide what to do with those savings. It also assumes that you can get to a level of accuracy with that AI workflow that the team is comfortable with from from an accuracy perspective, right? And now that might be the right use case for this company to focus on, but starting first with an audit of all of the workflows that you think might be the highest impact ones, and picking the ones where, again, that intersection of business value and where you're okay with kind of I don't know, medium to medium high fidelity of accuracy. A strategy like that, right, which requires just workflow discovery and auditing of those workflows and doing some kind of ROI calculations before you jump into the tool and even start prototyping. That's what we see as much more successful in organizations that are reporting real ROI, but it's not the norm. I would say the norm is people are starting with the tools. They say, we picked this tool and now we want to get value out of it. Very, very common also in specific teams, right? Vertical AI, Harvey for legal, or some, we've picked this marketing AI tool. Now we're going to use it. What are we going to use it for? Is that a high value use case? So again, a very, very common one. Good segue to number 9. I think this idea of thinking about what accuracy level you are going to be comfortable with for a specific use case, right? How high fidelity, high stakes is the implementation is really, really one that people kind of don't, it just doesn't get thought about, right? If they're thinking about the kind of ROI, they think about it through the lens of what I was just doing, right? Like how much time or cost does this require today, and how much time could we save, or how much money could we save? But I often see ROI stall out at that pilot stage. The prototype's built, the subject matter expert starts using it, and suddenly the team realizes it was pretty easy to get to a prototype that's like 50 to 60% accurate, and really, really hard to get the workflow working so it's 80 or 90 or 100% accurate, whatever the kind of the level is based on the importance of the task to the organization. And then they've spent a bunch of time and money on a use case that frankly just can't be operationalized, right? It gets stuck in that pilot phase, which again, we see a lot in the data. You've basically created a proof of concept, but never moved it past that process. So in the process of the workflow discovery, when we do this, we think about, okay, yes, we have to think about, cost and time savings. We have to think about how much money are we spending on this, and what output are we getting. We also have to think about accuracy or quality, like, and know upfront, like, what are we going to be comfortable with? What are, if that RFP person is spending, the answer might be they'd, go from spending 30% of their time doing a very manual process to 10% of their time, doing a process where they look at an output that's still always 80% accurate. And then they know that, and that's kind of built into how they think about the process. That's fine, but again, a lot of people forget about this, and then they're like already in proof of concept pilot stage when they're like, oh, it was pretty easy to get to okay. It's really, really hard to get to something that can actually be operationalized. Okay, last one, number 10, you don't understand your employees' real objections to using AI. Two kind of final stories I'll leave you with. I was talking to two heads of AI last week at companies that have very, very high AI adoption. And one shared that he had realized that enough of his employees were pushing back on using AI because of its environmental impact, that he had to figure out how to address that concern. So he spent a bunch of time looking at research and talking to, the LLM partners that they work with and figuring out how to think through the environmental impacts of AI, right? How do we essentially addressing a real objection that was preventing adoption in his organization and preventing high adoption in his organization. And the other head of the AI on the phone said, oh, I've had to do the exact same thing. So I think there are all these hidden barriers to usage and to adoption that, your employees are in either not saying, or, they're saying quietly, or you just don't kind of know, right? And then you don't know what you can be, what you should be, what you should be targeting. So I think, that's got to be, again, a lot of your goal as the head of AI, really understanding what are the objections, or what are the barriers that are standing in the way of my specific employee population or this part of the organization. Greg, our CEO, says a lot that using AI is like borrowing 30 points of IQ, which I like, but there are plenty of employees today that have experienced that, but then they're choosing not to use AI. So I was talking to a consultant last week. He was talking about a workshop that he does with execs, and he was saying he actually in the workshop shows execs, like before AI, he has them do a task, and then he has them do it after using AI, and they can see that they did the task better. It's very clear, like data driven. And then they follow these execs after and see, are they actually using AI? And about half of them don't go on to continue their use after the workshop. Like that's not very rational behavior, right? If you've seen that AI is gonna make you give you that 30 points of IQ or whatever it is, and then you're not consistently using it, which just tells you how nuanced the challenge is, right? And how there's tons of different objectives that your employees might have, again, consciously or unconsciously, that you have to get to the bottom of that are preventing usage and therefore ROI.